Welcome to Directionally Correct, a people analytics podcast with Cole and Scott, and today's guest, Bradford Williams, Head of People Analytics, Insights, and Workforce Planning at Northwestern Mutual. Thanks to our sponsors, One Model. One Model helps people leaders at large organizations make consistently brilliant talent decisions by unlocking the analytical value of the data dispersed across your business. One Model's people analytics platform takes all of the heavy lifting out of data extraction, cleansing, modeling, analytics, and reporting of enterprise workforce data. One Model pioneered people data orchestration and has perfected the ethical use of AI and data science for leaders who need transparent and explainable decision support systems. HR and business teams trust its accurate reports, analyses, and storytelling capabilities. Data scientists, engineers, and people analytics professionals love the combination of governance and flexibility that no other workforce insights platform can provide. To learn more, book a demo at onemodel.co/directionallycorrect. All opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization. I feel like I have spent the last 4 days just talking to you.
Yeah, I've seen you more than my own family at this point.
Well, just to set the tone here for today before we get into it, Scott won't be joining us today, regretfully. He recently lost a family member, and I don't know if, what he would want me to share or not share, but I just want him to know that his family and he are in our thoughts and prayers. But hopefully he'll be able to join us again soon. But today it's just gonna be me and you, Brad, and we're just kind of winging it.
We'll make the most of it. Thoughts and prayers definitely with Scott and his family as well. I'm bummed. I've never met him, but I feel like I know him, having listened to the podcast and having heard stories that you and I have shared and talked through. So bummed he's not here, but we'll make the most of it, right?
Absolutely. Well, where have we been hanging out the last few days? Why are we so? I'm tired. I don't know if you're tired.
I'm very tired. Planes, trains, and automobiles, all to get to the PA World Conference in New York. So Cole and I were on the same flight on the way there, same flight on the way back. Uber's there, Uber's back, lunches together. So yes, we've been spending a whole lot of time together.
Yeah, it's like we're new best friends, or like stepbrothers or something.
Yeah, I like to think we've been best friends for a while, right? But maybe our relationship took another step after the past couple of days here.
Absolutely, man. I mean, one of the things I appreciate about you is that we have been. I don't even really know when this started, but we've been getting kind of lunches on and off here in Dallas for a while, and I see you as kind of one of the pillars of the people analytics community here in DFW, and I don't know, I just appreciate you, man.
It goes both ways. I don't know that I've ever been described as a pillar of anything, so that's certainly flattering. But I've enjoyed very much getting to know you over the years. To your point, I have no idea when we first met, how we got introduced, how that connection came to life, but it's been nothing but lovely ever since then. And I appreciate everything that you do for the community broadly in the people analytics space, obviously with things like this podcast, but also local things that you're doing with meetups all across the country. Certainly the DFW meetup, which you and I spoke a little bit about yesterday during one of our many conversations, and how great and how unique that is. So I think that stands as a testament to all of the effort and legwork that you put into making that special.
We are definitely probably the best people analytics group in the country, if
Yeah,
not
I
the
don't, I
world.
don't, you're a better judge of that than I am because my sample size is just DFW. That's the only meetup that I've ever gone to, but in my experience, we're certainly the best.
Yeah. When I actually just recently stepped down from leading that group, which was kind of a neat passing of the torch. Our mutual friend Jordan Hartley who had
Yep.
been kind of co-leading it with me for a while, a previous guest on the podcast, and also some folks, a person that folks may not know, but she's big in the local community, Adele Malpert, who's over at Texas Instruments. So really grateful to them for, taking it over, and they're going to take it to the next level. I know for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm excited about what the future brings. I shed a tear when you announced you were stepping down, but I have no doubt that the two of them can continue to elevate the community.
This is way too nice. We need to be like meaner or something. Like, what is going on here? Are you running for Miss America? Like, what's happening?
This is where Scott maybe could provide a good balance, bring the conversation back down to a more normal level. So we can get the
Yeah.
pleasantries out of the way. Now we can dive a little
Well,
bit deeper and be a little bit more real.
maybe we can go to a different spot, because I was thinking one of the things that you told me in prep for the podcast was you got to play horse once with LeBron James, and I'm
Yes.
assuming he just kicked your ass. But I don't know if that actually happened, but tell me about that.
Yeah. Would it surprise you to say that I kicked his ass?
Very much so. Yes.
Yeah. As is not the case, to be clear.
Okay.
There's a bit of a backstory here. One of the fun things that I learned about you through the podcast is that you and I don't know that it was your first job, but one of your early jobs was at a place similar to Chuck E. Cheese. I forget the
Yeah. Fun Factory.
yeah, Fun Factory. Okay. So in the town that I grew up in, outside of Cleveland, Ohio, we had a similar place. That was one of my earlier jobs that I had. LeBron James is, perhaps famously from Akron, Ohio,
Mm-hmm.
not too far from where I grew up. Very much a local celebrity as he was in his high school days, and then got drafted, went to the Cleveland Cavs. Uh, he had his first kid, who's now, this makes me sound so old. I know that's a bit of a boomer thing to say, right? But had his first kid, Bronny, who's now playing in the NBA. He had his first birthday party at the place that I worked at. And so it was an entertainment center. There's arcades and laser tag and playgrounds and all sorts of things similar to, again, to Chuck E. Cheese. He was standing there by himself. He had a little bit of an entourage and crew with him, but waiting for his then girlfriend, now wife, and Ronnie to show up to the party. And I took a chance and was like, hey, we've got a little Tykes hoop in our back employee room. You want to go shoot around? And so he was like, yeah, why not? So we went back, played. We didn't play a full game of horse. And again, it was on a little Tykes hoop. He was definitely beating me like HOR. And then, unsurprisingly, his kid and family walked in and I got ditched. That was the end of it.
I mean, I think that's really all you can ask for if you meet like a truly, world famous person. I mean, I don't know. Was he world famous at that point?
He certainly wasn't as big as he is now, but he was big in high school. ESPN
Yeah.
was coming to his games. He was branded as the next Michael Jordan. This was after he graduated, and at that time you could go straight from high school to the NBA, so he never played college. So he was a professional basketball player at that time, really well known, but very, and you and I joked once, don't meet your heroes.
Yeah.
Very humble, very down to earth, an awesome guy. That was my only interaction with him. I hope he's still that way, but it was an awesome experience.
I bet he remembers it every day
Oh
about
yeah,
that great experience.
no doubt he talks about it just as much as I do.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit. So we were both speakers at the People Analytics World Conference up in New York. I think it was a fantastic conference. They got David Green to come over to this side of the pond, which was cool. What did you have any kind of like highlights, or did you want to talk at all about your presentation? I got to see it. It was pretty good. What do you want to not great, but pretty good.
Yeah, I like how you say it was pretty good while you chuckle under your breath there.
I'm trying not to be as nice as I was earlier. So just
That's fair. I saw your presentation, which I would love to dive into. I won't go into the
sure.
research, but we can talk through that. So I did have a couple of highlights. To your point, I thought it was a fantastic event. It was my first PA World event. It was the first one in the U.S. Uh, as with many of these conferences, I think there's a lot of great nuggets, and we can talk through some of it that take place in the sessions. There's a lot that also are just kind of the interactions that take place outside of the sessions and talking through people or talking through challenges, problems, whatever with folks. I thought the ones that really stood out to me, or maybe I'll do themes first. I'm curious to get your themes. I think the big ones were focusing on impact. It was one of the things you kind of talked through, certainly at the tail end of your talk on recommendations. Um, I think the other big thing that stood out to me, and maybe I'm bundling two topics here, the art of storytelling and being better marketers of people analytics to the enterprise. And I don't know that it's so much like salesmanship, but how do you just tell a better story or have a bigger impact or market your impact or what you can do better than we do today, broad brushstrokes.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it was the salesmanship component as much as is the marketing component,
Yeah.
right? And it's not so much like you have to be able to sell yourself, it's just you can't be terrible at it. Right? Which I mean, a lot of data people aren't necessarily known for being the most, engaging speakers or best
Yep.
storytellers or what have you, and so that's definitely relevant. Um,
I'm curious to get your thoughts on this because this was one of the hallway conversations that I had with a couple of people. I think there's a balance here on our role in people analytics being a little bit unique in trying to be as objective as possible and being,
mhm.
what is it, the left side of the brain, right? Where it's just logic and reason that should stand the test of time and be, above all else. Most other functions, most other teams, certainly within HR, don't operate that way. They're pushing an agenda. They've got opinions. They've got perspectives. If the data supports it, great. If not, like, we'll push the data aside. I still believe what I want to believe. I think we as a domain area struggle a little bit in almost being too objective and not having points of view, not having opinions because we want to just let the data, let the analytics speak for themselves and
Yeah.
almost play devil's advocate on both sides of like, well, you could do this, but here's all the downside, but don't do this other thing because, the data might not support it. And I think that gets in our way and it gets into a little bit of the marketing component of like, how do we push things forward without coming across as biased?
Yeah. Well, and then we're also have the reverse viewpoint, which we're so worried about being biased too, and trying to be objective arbiters of information that we like sometimes can't get out of our own heads in terms of just saying. Sometimes you need to make, leaders just want to hear a declarative statement of here's what we found and here's what we think you need to do, and
Yep.
anything more than that is too much information. I don't know. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I absolutely do. And I think there was one of the speakers, I'll misattribute it if I try to guess who it is, so I won't. Uh, you even touched on it a little bit too, of if you put one data point on a presentation, people are going to ask three questions. If you put three data points on a presentation, they're going to ask nine questions. It's kind of like, and again, it's a silly multiple.
Yeah.
It's arbitrary, right? But the more you show, the more you're opening yourself up to questions and nitpicking. And I think you're forced to play a little bit more defensive when you're trying to be prepared for 87 questions that might come your way versus one very pointed point of view perspective with data behind it, and being able to peel the onion one layer deep versus 17 layers deep.
Absolutely. I love that. Well, tell us about, well, actually, I think it's actually probably a good segue into this. What is a mutual? I found this out at the conference, and we even read into Craig Starbuck at the airport, and I realized I'm not the only stupid one who doesn't know what a mutual is, because Craig didn't know either. We just thought it meant like, hey, it's a trustworthy company that, is a mutual partner to you, or you may be a mutual fund or something like that. But what is a mutual? And then how does that relate to kind of what you talked about at People Analytics World about what's going on at Northwestern Mutual?
Yeah. So I can't tease you too much because after I came home last night, I asked my wife, "Do you know what a mutual company is?" And she had the exact same response that you did, that Craig did. And so if I tease you, I'm, by proxy teasing my wife as well, which I can't do here. So a mutual company is a company that is owned by its policyholders. So we don't operate with shareholders. We operate through our policyholders, our policy owners, which makes us a little bit unique. There's a handful of mutual companies that are out there. We're certainly not the only one. In response to this conversation, which as a backstory for folks listening, Cole and I went down and kind of played what happens if activist policyholders could get a hold of a mutual company. What does that look like? And we were laughing, crying for a good 10 or 15 minutes at the airport restaurant that we were at. Folks probably thought we were a little bit crazy, but
This guy better not die.
yes, I will. I will still be laughing about that next year.
Yeah.
So, where was I going with this though? Mutual companies. So, what I did look up in response to the conversation that you and I had last night was that nobody really knows how mutual companies got their name. It sounds like there's kind of myths and urban legends as to what that came to be, but it does sound like the origin came from exactly what you described. It's mutually beneficial for all parties, and we operate, and it's mutual, and everybody loves us, right? So your basis for thinking what a mutual company is has a solid foundation behind it. I did also, fun fact here for folks listening that do care, the first mutual company was actually started by Ben Franklin. It wasn't called a mutual company at the time, but the idea was there and implemented by none other than Ben Franklin.
That's wild.
Yeah.
He invented so many things. I know he invented a lot of stuff. I didn't know he invented a mutual because I didn't know what a mutual was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what's going on at Northwestern Mutual in the people analytics space? And it seems like you guys are in a time of kind of great transformation as well as a business.
Yeah, we are. There's a ton going on at Northwestern Mutual. I think there's, that doesn't make us unique by any means. There's a lot going on at a lot of different organizations. I think there's, I don't want to be so generic to say it's an exciting time here at NM,
but it's an exciting time in it.
Yeah, but it's an exciting time at NM. So we've got a handful of things going on, both kind of macro level and hitting a little bit closer to home. My point of view is, we're going to continue doing what we are doing. And I think there's even an opportunity to accelerate, double down on some of the work and impacts that we're having. Some of the cool things that we're diving into, and this goes a little bit to the presentation that I had at PA World, is kind of re-looking at the way we've looked at traditional metrics. So during the conference, I talked about succession pipelines and how we traditionally look at, do we have ready now successors? Great, thumbs up. kick our feet back and we're good. There's probably more nuanced views of what does healthy succession actually look like and what other factors should we be looking at. So beyond just succession health, we're kind of looking at that from a couple of different angles, trying to put unique spins on things to tell a more holistic, rounded out story. So that's maybe one of the smaller examples of what we're
Well,
diving into and what lies ahead for us.
the irony is not lost on me that the subtext of your presentation is you're doing very relevant succession analytics in a time where what is the main relevant kind of, I don't know if you would call it a business problem, but it's just a business focus is succession, right?
Yeah,
And so again, back to your theme of what's going on at People Analytics World, talking about making impact, being business relevant. What you presented on, although not couched in that way, was absolutely working on what is the most business relevant thing that you guys can be supporting. Well, it's succession analytics, and guess what? There's a bunch of succession planning going on at Northwestern Mutual right now.
yeah. I think there was, I'm kind of looking through my notes here. There was Kevin Zahn. I'll butcher the company that he represents, but he had a great presentation, I think earlier in the day on Wednesday. And one of his quotes was, avoid creating solutions to problems that don't exist. And I think
Mm-hmm.
in the PA space, there's times where we see a shiny object that's really cool and fascinating and intriguing to us, or conceptually, theoretically, but doesn't really have tangible impact, tangible value for the organization, or they just don't care about it. And indexing on impact, what are those real problems, goes a long way. So that was maybe one of the themes that resonated. And then again, it goes off of the whole idea of impact and adding value to the organization, but it's also just understanding what are the problems taking place, or what challenges, what are leaders thinking about, and how can you embed analytics, people data into making decisions, or uncovering what might be beneath the surface there.
Absolutely. Well, is there anything that you, I don't know, that you wanted to talk about today in terms of like, kind of ping ponging back and forth? I'll ask you to play a little bit of Scott's role here for a
Ah,
second.
I could never fill those shoes. But I'll maybe start off broad. I've got a couple of questions for you. One,
Sure.
I'm curious what your takeaways were from PA World, or if there were any sessions that really stood out to you that kind of provoked thoughts, ideas from your end.
Yeah, I really liked. Well, I'll say my first takeaway is the relationships in the people analytics community are paramount. It's why I go to these things. It's why I see. I probably hang out in the hallway more than I see the sessions, frankly. So I'm a bad person to ask that question to. But I mean, it was. I would say Bridie Lear's presentation was
Yeah,
excellent. It's always good to see the research that Insight 222 is doing in terms of what it takes to be an A team and all of that type of work. Yeah, I got to see Richard's presentation, Richard Rosenau on the people data supply chain, which is fascinating, and he had talked about it on the podcast before.
yeah,
All of those they're really good. I think the things that really stuck out to me, and again, I think this was related to my talk as well, is I'm just kind of in a one track mind right now of like there were like excellent topics. There was one on like simplicity. There was some on
yeah.
the sales and marketing. The things that like I'm like really focused on right now is like how do we remain relevant to businesses? Like I just can't get out of that like cycle in my head. And so when somebody's talking, I'm like, is this related to being relevant to business? And if the answer is no, I just kind of tune it out or I leave I leave the session. And so like that's just the kind of the mindset I'm in right now, and I don't know how to get out of it, frankly.
One of the things that I appreciated about your presentation, we talked about it a little bit after. Uh, I think there's two ways to look at all the research and data that you talked through. There's a very pessimistic view of PA is kind of a fad and we're declining, and it, you know, it was, or maybe still is, a luxury that more and more organizations are realizing is not a necessity. There's also, I really liked how you compared it to the Gartner hype cycle and kind of the slope of enlightenment and where we're at in the, what is it, the trough of disillusionment, if memory serves correct. So I think there's a really optimistic point of view, but with that, it requires the community, maybe that being a theme here, to really zero in on impact, because if PA teams aren't doing that, we're never going to fulfill the vision and lead to enlightenment in that life cycle.
And for context for the people who weren't there, so I gave a presentation on that. I'd written some articles about that have been out there for a little bit about what's been happening to people analytics in the last 15 years. And I mean, it was kind of depressing. Like there's a strong 13-year story and then a sad 2-year story. And the goal is like, if we're going to course correct, and the net of it is, I think almost 1,000 people, or more than 1,000 people in the United States that practice people analytics have left the field in the last 2 years, whether it be through layoffs or their own choice, what have you. And what do we do to course correct? Right. And the thing I'm putting forward is we have to be relentlessly focused on the business. And, people always talk about creating value, but value is an ambiguous term. I'm talking about literally creating dollars and cents return on investment for the work that we do. And it's just, in my mind, it's like existential. And that's going to be the thing that gets us to the slope of enlightenment and out of the doldrums that we appear to be in lately. Or we could just wait for interest rates to lower and then the high times will be back and, everything will be great again. But I'd rather not do that. I'd rather kind of take matters into our own hands, let's say.
Yeah. So maybe the answer to this question is easy for you, but I'm curious what it feels like as a community, even, specific to the conference. What does it feel like we're talking too much about, and what does it feel like we're not talking enough about?
Oh, geez. We're talking too much
I know,
about.
I'm trying to play Scott
Well,
here.
I mean, here's the easy one. The easy one is we're talking too much about generative AI. And I'm guilty of it just as much as the next person. But if you compared the hype versus the reality,
Yeah.
or the amount of the amount of oxygen it's taking versus the amount of impact it's having, they're just out of proportion, out of whack. We should be talking about it, obviously. What's not being talked about enough, is that the other side of the question? Um, I guess I'm sorry. I'm like beating a drum here on this, but in my presentation, I know you remember this, I asked people to raise their hand if they do any project, any piece of work that has a return on investment. And I would say maybe 10% of the room raised their hand. And then I said, does anyone have a commitment to their business of making return on investment as a dollar figure? Is it $1? Is it $100,000? Is it $1,000,000? Only one person had left their hand raised in a room full of, I don't know, 200, 300 people.
Yep.
That's a problem. And we can talk about it. I mean, it is getting talked about, but I don't think anyone has put it in those terms before. And I just don't think it's being talked about enough. I don't know. Again, maybe that's selfish. Maybe that's just me looking at me. But I don't know. I think it's really, really relevant right now.
Yeah. I mean, I would echo your exact responses. I think generative AI, and one of the things that I appreciate about the conference is it wasn't so Gen AI or AI broadly focused.
Yeah.
Sure, there are sessions it's impossible not to, and it's good to be talking about that and thinking through it. But I've been to conferences here recently that like you can't escape a single sentence without AI being thrown in there in every single panel discussion, presentation, whatever. So I think I agree. There's too much talk on that. Not to say it's not important, but we might be over indexing on that. And the impact piece is real. I would love to see us talking through more panel discussions, more presentations on what does impact look like. How do we quantify it? So maybe those are future sessions.
Maybe
Uh,
next year. That's Brad's keynote. Be on the lookout.
I told you my certainly not keynote, but my talk track next year, because every conference seems to be full of the Instagram reel of highlights and successes and what went well and what everybody else should be doing to follow in their footsteps. I would love to have a blooper reel of PA, and I'm happy to be the poster child of a blooper reel and all the mistakes that you can make along the way and where things fail or go wrong or lessons learned. So I'll probably do that one instead of impact. Not to say it's not important, but I'll leave the impact more for you.
Well, you could arguably say that yours is more valuable than that, because the number one things that trips us up on the way to making an impact is the bloopers. you know,
Yeah,
the thing, the things where we stub our toe for, you could call it, your on goals of we're just shooting our own self in the foot. But yeah, I think that would be excellent, and it is not talked enough about. So that would be great. Do you want to do some confusion matrix, Brad?
I would love to.
The confusion matrix. Real quick, we wanted to say thanks again to One Model, the AI and people analytics pioneer, for sponsoring the episode. And now back to the confusion matrix. So this is going to be, I think Scott's called these before, the totally random. So this is going to be truly totally random. We're going to cover some stuff that's related to what we've been talking about. It's going to cover some things that are not related at all. But the first one I have for you is, what is one common misconception about people analytics that you'd like to debunk?
Man, that's a good one. I maybe it goes back to what we talked about earlier. I think that PA in general, maybe it's overly broad to say shouldn't have a point of view or doesn't have a point of view. I think it feels that way though. And from folks outside of the space, and even again internally within the community, it feels like we shouldn't have a point of view or shouldn't have a perspective or just be entirely objective in everything that we do. And again, I think there's a lot of goodness to that. I think there's a misconception that that's how we should operate at all times, at all costs, and getting away from that would benefit the community.
Yeah.
Can I flip that question back on you?
I think our name is weird. I, I think it, like, our name misleads people as to what we do. And I think that is, like, our name itself is the misconception.
What would you rename us to?
Oh, I don't think there's a good name. I've actually thought about this a lot. This is probably one of the least bad names, but I'm not sure it's the right name.
Uh-huh.
And it's because, I mean, this was a hot, I don't know why this is a hot topic, but this was a hot topic at the conference, is what is people analytics?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
We're 15 years in, we still haven't decided what it is. And I know Scott and I have gone back and forth on this plenty of times on the podcast as well. I have my own definition. I don't even like to get into it because all it does is create debates. But I think the misconception itself is just our name, and what it is that we do. But let's do another totally random. And you actually sent me over some fodder, so I think this will be good. What is better, a football tailgate, a football game, or holiday season?
All
What
right.
is better?
You switched it up a little bit.
I told you it's totally random.
You know, I'm gonna I'll rank them: football tailgate, holiday season, football game in order.
Now, have you ever gone to a football game and not, or to tailgate and not had a ticket to the game and just stayed at the tailgate? Have you ever done that?
Uh, yeah. So I'll tell a quick story here. It's one of the things that my wife constantly brings up to me. Uh, she went to Texas A&M. She's an Aggie. I went to the University of Tennessee. We're not really rivals, but we play each other in football from time to time. rarely. But we went down to College Station for Tennessee Texas A&M game while I think we were dating at the time. I don't think we were married just yet. Uh, and I figured, like, let's go down, we'll meet some friends, spend time at the tailgate, and then we'll go scalp tickets ahead of time and, watch the game, figure it all out. Uh, Very much a lack of planning or just hoping things work out as they did. There were no tickets to scalp. Absolutely none. I was going up to uh, sorority girls who were walking into the game 30 minutes late, asking, begging them for their ticket, and got declined every single time. And offering money, not just trying to snab a free ticket. So there's been times, at least that time, where unintentionally we went to a tailgate and did not go to the game.
Yeah, that was unintentional. I've definitely gone intentionally to a tailgate and not gone to the game before, especially if the team's performance is very poor that
Yeah,
year.
yeah,
Um, and some of the research you sent over to me, I said that something like 24% of people have done that before, and I thought that was quite interesting. But the funny thing is, like, the tailgate's the best part, right?
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
It's even better than the holidays, apparently.
So you would put it above the holidays?
A good tailgate, absolutely. I've been to some bad tailgates too, and
Yeah,
I would not do those again. But I've been to some bad holidays as well, so
yeah. And I mean, bad holidays are fun in their own way, though.
yeah, I guess so. Right. Uh, well, what's your favorite people analytics metric or calculation or concept? Let's call it.
Yeah, I threw this question out. I oftentimes find myself doing this where I throw out questions without thinking of great answers myself. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on this one. One of the ones that I do like, I don't know if I would put this up as my favorite, but I've always been a fan of talent importer and exporter in terms of teams, managers, to understand who is moving talent in and out of their team,
Mhm.
department, whatever the case may be. Not to say that it's good nor bad, but I think it starts to paint a picture. Certainly, when you start to couple it with other metrics and kind of your standard ones of engagement, attrition, other things, it paints a picture of what is the dynamic or what's the culture like within a given area. So I'm preferential to that one, but curious your thoughts there.
Yeah, I had to kind of go dig it up. I'd written a article maybe almost 3 years ago now called "Overrated and Underrated Topics in People Analytics,"
Mm,
and we talked about the three that I really harped on in terms of like metrics, because some of them were like concepts. Like, I think qualitative data is underrated, but that's not a metric.
yeah,
Two of them were employee lifetime value and organizational network analysis, but we've covered those lately. And so the one that we haven't covered that I think really is very underrated, like, is the concept of the employee value proposition. And how do you quantify that? Because I put it kind of conversely to EX, or employee experience. EX is trading at all-time highs and employee value proposition is a penny stock, and I'm
yeah,
over here saying employee value proposition, if calculated correctly, really helps you understand, especially where you stand in the marketplace. And it combines even things like internal versus external data, which, I talked about at the conference as
yeah.
well. And I don't know. I think that is a very underrated area, and I'll make a small plug here. It's very related to everyone gets paid the same. A theory by Cole Napper. So if you're ever interested, look up everyone gets paid the same. Anyway,
Yeah.
just a nice little plug there.
Yeah.
Um,
Piggybacking off of that a little bit, I we don't have to go into ONA because I know you've touched on that a handful of times, certainly in recent episodes even. But I think there is so much value in that, that again, what can we do to focus on impact? I think ONA, again, in and of itself is not the you know end all be all, but it's a good avenue to get there. And I think the external data, as you talk through, or talent intelligence, whatever phrase you want to throw on it really can start to push teams. Certainly those, B, C, and D teams that Insight 222 talks through, to become more A teams.
Brad, do you want to do one more confusion matrix, or do you want to go on to the nerdery?
Let's do confusion matrix. I'm looking forward to the nerdery though.
All right. What is your favorite or the weirdest corporate jargon you subscribe to, or that you see other people use?
So can I tell you my least favorite? It's got to be mind meld. Whenever people say mind meld, I have to bite my tongue. And this comes from a guy, and I hate to admit this about myself. I use corporate jargon all the time, and I kind of cringe every single time I do. I think, hopefully it was when I cut out earlier, I said I'm going to piggyback off of one of your ideas. Like phrases like that, I have just accepted as part of my vernacular that I need to get away from.
Do you though? Those are like easier transit. In my opinion, there's like, I'm going to piggyback off your ideas, just a way of saying like, hey, I'm going to take over the conversation from you, but in a polite way. Right.
Yeah,
Or that's just like, it's like a necessary, like easing into kind of conversation. So you're not a jerk. Whereas
yeah,
sometimes it's things like, I don't know, people say, well, the soup to nuts, or
yeah.
like there's like really these really obscure things. Like I'll even give you one. I don't even know if he wants me to share this, but he after my presentation, I was asking David Green, what do you think? And he said it was like, is the pigeon eating the cat or something like that? And I was like, what does that mean? I was like, this is either the best or worst presentation you've ever seen, because I don't know what that means. But apparently that's like British corporate jargon.
All right. And you haven't looked up to know that whether that's a positive or negative sentiment?
I have no idea. Probably shouldn't be mentioning it on a podcast, but oh well.
I, probably 10 years ago, I had a boss that used all sorts of phrases that nobody on the team understood. The one that I remember, I'm curious if you've heard this before, is a dog's breakfast. He
I
called
haven't
things,
heard that.
yeah, I hadn't either. I looked it up after he used it for the 73rd time, to understand what it meant. It just means things are a mess.
Oh,
Why that gets equated to a dog's breakfast, I'm not sure, but if you want to use that one, you can.
yeah. Right after I used the bee's knees or something. I don't know. It seems very 1950s.
The other one, that I'll touch on real quick, I use it and I hate myself for using it, is I'll give you some time back. Every time that word phrase comes out of my mouth, I cringe at the end of calls.
Yeah, I don't like that one either.
Yeah.
But that's more like I own your time, and therefore I'm granting it back to you. I
Yeah.
don't know. That's a, I don't know.
Yeah. I would
Uh,
love it if that phrase just went extinct.
my preference is let's end early.
A more positive spin on it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's great. We're done. Anyway, well, let's do some nerdery now. How about that?
Yeah. Let's do it.
The nerdery. All right, I'm gonna work on pulling up my screen here, but do you believe, and I realize I don't think Scott and I ever talked about this, but found some research on it. Do you believe that leaders, they're natural born leaders, and if there are any kind of like distinct personalities that make someone a good leader?
I've been thinking about this. So one of the things I love to give backdrop and context to everything, right, Cole?
Mm-hmm.
I was getting my PhD. You and I talked through this. I dropped out. I'm a college dropout. But I loved.
He's an almost Iowa psychologist, people. I just
Oh
found this out. I've known you for years. I didn't even realize.
yeah, just a dropout though. But I had many attempts of topics for my dissertation, and they were all centered around personality. So I love the idea of like trying to understand, personality, and this certainly ties into whether leaders are born or made. It's nature, nurture. I think it's a little bit of both, right? That's the unfun answer. I do think there are prototypes or archetypes that are more conducive to good leaders. And so I think I would index more on that end of the spectrum, but it's certainly a blend.
Well, you are correct, sir. according according to Professor Dr. Ava Selman, I think is how you pronounce that. She did a 2022 study that had almost 3,000 leaders and 30,000 non-leaders, looking at the personality changes before becoming and after becoming a leader. And one of the things that they found that in the differences between leaders and non-leaders is the leaders tended to be more extroverted, more open, more emotionally stable, conscientious, and willing to take risk and trusting. But interestingly, they're also less agreeable, but do have a tendency to forgive. And so, what this is sort of lending credence to is that there are some archetypes or prototypes of what it means to be a leader. One of the other things that they found, though, and I thought this was really interesting, is at the same time, emerging leaders change their personality in preparation for becoming a leader. And this is called the anticipation effect. I'd never heard of this. And so they said leaders to be become more extroverted, open, willing to take risk, and even feel more in control while approaching the position. One of the things that they find, though, is they actually backslide somewhat once they get into the role. And so the leaders maintain their feelings of openness and being in control and gain some self esteem too after they get more experience. But their extroversion drops immediately back to the baseline, and conscientiousness begins to decline, and risk willingness also declined from the start of the movement there. So I thought this was fascinating. It's been in vogue lately to say, I mean, there's a million different theories of leadership. Let's be honest about this,
Yeah.
but it's been in vogue to say that leaders aren't born, they're made. And this is more, I mean, you know, personality traits are relatively stable. I'm not saying you're
Yeah.
born that way, but they're relatively stable throughout your life, unless some really chaotic stuff happens to you. And so maybe there is some part of the pie that's made that leaders are made or are born. I'm sorry. I don't know.
Yeah.
How do you react to this, Brad?
So first off, I loved the article. I'm fascinated by it. I probably will spend more time over the weekend digging in a little bit deeper, because one of the questions I did have was like, what is the type of leader? Are we talking like C-suite CEOs, or are we talking frontline leaders? Is it a catch-all? I think there's differences in there. One of the things that stood out most to me, maybe a little bit dangerous, was uh, after leaders get put in the position, conscientiousness goes down, declines, while self esteem goes up. That feels like a dangerous combination of, like, I guess I wouldn't expect anything else, but it doesn't feel like that's a productive thing for leaders.
See, that is a funny interpretation. My interpretation. I'll get into my reaction to what you just said because that is a very thoughtful response. My reaction is like they were faking it, being conscientious, and then they got there and they're just like, oh, finally, I can relax. but
Yeah,
uh, but I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense and is almost in the vein of kind of like the Peter principle type of things.
yeah,
Is
yeah,
people get to their highest level of incompetence, they're like, I am really good at this, you know? It's like, no, you're not. But
yep. Well, the other funny thing too is that perceived control goes up in anticipation and then it declines. And so I think there is this very real perception of leaders having all of this control. And it grows with that anticipation. And then once you get put into a leadership role, you start to realize there's still a lot of constraints and a lack of control that you have in that role. And so that one rang especially true to me as I read it.
well, you're going to see a theme here in some of the nerdery articles about leadership in general, because I think this is a really good pivot to the second article we have, which is it has been creating such a stir around Silicon Valley over the last, month and a half or 2 months. I actually wanted to wait for the stir to die down before we covered it because it was getting kind of polarizing. But it was this there's this guy, if you're not familiar with him, his name is Paul Graham. He was the founder of Y Combinator, which is the premier um, startup accelerator in the Bay Area. And he writes a bunch of these articles. We've covered a few in the past, but it's been quite some time. He wrote this article called Founder Mode. And what is founder mode? So recently, Y Combinator had Brian Chesky, who's the CEO of Airbnb, come and give a talk to the Y Combinator group. And this is basically just kind of talking about Paul Graham's reactions to it. He said, when you become a CEO of one of these startups, the advice that you're given is hire good people, give them the room to do their job. So these managers, again, that we just covered about like our, leaders born or they made, give them the ability to do their jobs. And essentially, what they're advocating for is don't do that. What they call that manager mode.
Yeah.
And the alternative is founder mode, which is instead of a CEO kind of sitting in the tower, only working with their direct reports and then trusting their direct reports to, run their functions of the business and everything goes great. It says, no, get deep down into the weeds of the business. And, like if they gave an example, if you had like a top 100 meeting at your company, most companies, that's the top most senior people in the organization. And they said, absolutely not. You should be bringing the most important 100 people, even if they're an individual contributor to the organization, and that you shouldn't frown upon things like skip level meetings and the like. And there's been some kind of funny connotations out there and memes about what founder mode means. But I don't know. What was your reaction to this, Brad?
So I have mixed reactions. On one hand, it rings true. I think companies need to operate differently depending on where they're at in their life cycle, right? I also wonder, are founders just not good, not making good hiring decisions? And again, maybe it goes back into some of the like Peter principle or the leadership aspect that we just talked through. And there's an archetype that leaders have, and it's not a one size fits all for different companies. And so, do you need to hire differently for leaders in startups and kind of founder mode, or leaders that are in more stable companies and kind of be manager mode? So, I think there's probably nuance there. The one thing that stood out to me, you talked through it a little bit, the Steve Jobs at Apple and how they went on retreats with the 100 most important people in the organization and said, screw hierarchy. We're going to find the 100 people. And if it's 8 layers deep in the organization, so be it. I thought that was fascinating. Most companies wouldn't dare do that today.
Yeah. I remember a company, this was quite some time ago, where they had like their executive retreat just for HR, not for the entire company. And I was like a first line level manager, and they invited me to that retreat. And all of the CHRO's direct reports were furious. And they're like, you don't do this. They're basically like saying you're breaking ranks. And so I
Yeah.
can just imagine at the CEO level, just how much people would lose their minds over that type of thing. But kind of going back to the founder mode article, I mean, they didn't pull any punches in here. They were talking about like these manager mode. They called them professional fakers,
Yeah.
right? And so maybe the founders are bad at hiring. Maybe they're just really good at assessing or hiring professional fakers instead of what might be a good manager. But I think why this became such a polarizing article, why I brought it up here today, was because essentially what they're saying is all the research that we know about managers and leadership and how to run effective businesses. They put a tax straight on business schools. They said business schools don't know how to churn out leaders to run businesses effectively. They're saying like all that's wrong. And you know who's right? A few of these founders. And I just wonder. I mean, my answer is it's probably somewhere in between, frankly,
Yeah.
because I've seen so much unsavory stuff that, people who turned out of business school and some of these professional fakers do in the real world. So I know what they're talking about, right? Like there's not nothing there. But the other side of it is does the founder always have all of the wisdom? Because I mean, I've worked for a few startups. They're very brilliant people, generally speaking, and sometimes they do really stupid stuff.
Yeah.
and
Well,
and so is this just like a get out of jail free card for founders as well?
yes. That's a little bit where my head is. Let's be honest, it's a lot easier for a startup to fail than a more stable company. And so are these leaders that are being hired into startups a little bit of the scapegoat of this is why it didn't work out. It's because my leadership operated poorly and they just become the scapegoat of why that startup failed. Because it's certainly not the founder's fault.
Absolutely. Well, now we'll have our third article that's on a similar topic, right? And this is a new HBR article that got published, maybe just 2 weeks ago, that shows that AI can mostly outperform human CEOs. So, are these founders that good? If they're doing these studies in academia that are showing that, and I think what they actually compared CEOs to business students to I believe it was Chat GPT 4.0 on a different set of there were these simulations where there were no right answers. It was a combination of really ambiguous situations that they had to work themselves through. But essentially, what they found is in all situations, except for one, which I'll explain in a minute, the AIs outperformed the CEOs and the business students. The one thing that tripped them up were what they call black swan events, where they vastly underperformed the CEOs and the business students. And so if you're just thinking about business as usual, running your business, managing costs while trying to pursue growth, like really, the typical things a CEO is producing, apparently AI is already exceeding the human limit there. It's it seems like what it really struggles with is just some kind of ambiguity or kind of jolts to the system that it's not prepared for. So I thought this was fascinating and in relationship to the first two articles that we had here. What were your thoughts on this, Brad?
So on one hand, I think the it's maybe overly used to say, yep, hybrid and augmenting AI with human judgment, intuition is the way to go. I think that's kind of the punchline of the article. I think it rings true to a lot of folks. The first off, that assessment, I would love to get my hands on. It sounds fascinating. Like
Yeah.
I think that's where there's such richness in leveraging AI. Like I think there's assessment space. So I know that's a bit of an aside, but I think there's like, what are you trying to maximize? Is it short-term
Mhm.
focused? Is it long-term focused? And like, what is the AI indexing on? What are humans indexing on? And how do you try to balance both of those perspectives? And I think like what I took away is if you can find the right balance and almost position as devil's advocate or just a balance where one, whether AI or human, are indexing on short term, how do we just grow at all costs? And another perspective, the opposite, of how do we be a little bit more risk averse and emphasize long term growth versus immediate results? The answer is you've got to find the sweet spot in the middle, regardless of which hat the AI is wearing and which hat humans are wearing.
Absolutely. When I wondered too, and I think this is kind of your point about the assessment itself. I wonder how like, high fidelity that assessment
Yeah.
is. Like, is it true to reality? I don't know. I can't say yay or nay on that. But if it is, that this is a fascinating finding. I do wonder. Like, I think like when you come to these, this is kind of a build on that point, but I do wonder. Like a lot of what a CEO does isn't actually running a business. Like a lot of it's just like dealing with people, the politics of their organization, and I wonder how much, um, like it's not just you make a decision like a dictator, and then everybody executes that decision like the simulation would do. A lot of it's about
Yeah.
influencing others to maybe do things that they don't feel like it's in their best interest. And I do wonder if that plays a role in terms of the CEO's level of savvy versus like an AI right now, because as far as I can tell, AIs are really good at creating bullet points and not as good at influencing people yet.
Yeah. And I was one of the things that I looked at as you sent over the article. It rang a bell of a New York Times poll where 47% of executives said they believe AI could replace or automate most or all of a CEO's job. And that seems, again, depending on how people answer that question, most or all has, there's a big difference between most and all, right? Uh, but I am shocked that 47% is as high as it is because, to your point, a lot of what a CEO is doing is interpersonal skills and influencing
Sure.
and relationships. And AI is not there yet.
Well, I think about it as like, what if it turns into that they find, at least in business as usual time, so it's not COVID or some kind of black swan event, but in business as usual times, maybe AIs have superior decision making, and then it's the CEO's job just to be the enforcer,
Yeah.
right, of that decision making, because the AI it's not going to be able to influence the change necessary. But maybe the savvy CEOs of the future, and maybe they don't even share that they're using AI to make these decisions, but they just use AI as their oracle of sorts, and then they have the interpersonal savvy to make those things happen in the real world. I don't know. That's a fascinating future for sure.
Yeah. One of the common threads that stood out to me across all three articles was really around like risk taking. And I
Hmm.
think there is a balance of risk in that article of AI versus humans in being CEOs. Like I think what's your level of risk? What are you indexing on short term, long term growth? I think the other one that stood out to me in going back to the first article of Are Leaders Born or Are They Made? Risk taking goes down the longer you're in leadership roles. And it
Hmm.
goes like what analogy I played in my head is going back to football and tailgates is it's very different when you're playing with a lead and you're comfortable. You're kind of playing not to lose versus playing to win. And maybe it goes into even founder mode where you can be a little bit more aggressive. You're on the offense, you're taking risks. You're by default having to pivot at some point in time to less risky behavior, being a little bit more cautious. And that was one of the threads that just stood out to me across all three of those. Curious your thoughts on just risk taking.
Yeah. No, I love it. The through line going back to the tailgates, founder
Yeah,
mode. You're a directionally correct natural, Brad. You get us. They just tying it all together, making these loose connections. No, I love it. And I mean, everybody knows this. People when they have more to lose are less willing to take risk in terms of like, when you're new, you have to prove yourself, right?
yeah,
And so you're willing to take risks because you almost have to take risks. Everything is a risk when you're new, right? But once you've established yourself, sometimes that equation inverts in terms of, well, I have established myself. I am a known commodity. I have all this, positive social capital. I just have more to lose, to use the football analogy that you had from earlier. So that is fascinating. And it's probably a good stopping point. So Brad, it's been fantastic having you on as a guest and getting to spend so much time with you this week. Any final words that you want to share?
Uh, I'm so happy to be on the podcast. I'm a little bit jealous of all of the. Well, I'm both jealous and humbled with all the prior guests that have been on here. Prasad was on not too long before me. I'm very envious of the title that you guys popped up for him as, I forget what it was, PA legend. I get the generic head of PA at NM, but I'll take it. But so many guests, so happy to be on and just appreciate what you and Scott are doing for the larger community here. So thanks.
We'll give you the People Analytics Founder mode. That'll be your title, Brad. How about that?
Love it.
Well, you've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Cole and Scott, and today's guest, Bradford Williams. Thanks for joining us, Brad.
Thanks, Cole.
I'd like to thank two of our new patrons, Emily Pelosi and Joy Oliver, who both happen to be previous guests of the podcast as well. Thank you both for being patrons of the podcast. Directionally Correct is dedicated to you, our listeners, to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively do people analytics. By supporting this podcast, you are helping us continue to provide valuable insights and knowledge to our listeners. Please consider becoming a patron of the podcast. You can find the link to sign up in the show notes or at patron.podbean.com/directionallycorrect. Thanks for your support.